He knelt beside a little girl as she flipped through the pages of her favorite book. Her tiny finger paused under a word she didn't understand. "What's that one?" she asked, looking up at him with eyes that mirrored his own. He cleared his throat. "That one means to mend what's been broken." She smiled, not knowing how deeply those words sank into him. Across the room, Aveline stood quietly near a shelf of donated books, her expression unreadable, watching. The man who had once signed away his role in their lives was now here, hands ink-smudged from helping, children paint, hair out of place, kneeling humbly in the reading center that bore her daughter's name. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, surrounded by shelves of worn stories and second chances, the silence said it all. Have you ever walked away from something, not because you didn't love it, but because you were afraid you wouldn't know how? Have you ever hurt someone so deeply, even you doubted you deserved to be let back in? This isn't a tale of fairy tale love. It's a story of falling, failing, and finding the courage to come back, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. A man left his pregnant wife with no explanation. Years later, he meets the daughter he abandoned. In a center her mother built from pain, purpose, and hope. But can a man rebuild trust with the same hands he used to break it? Or are some doors better left closed? If you believe people can change, and if you think forgiveness, when earned, is the most powerful form of love, go ahead and tap the like button. Subscribe for more stories that remind us just how strong the human heart can be. His name was Kellen Hawthorne. To most of the world, he was the sharp mind behind one of the most powerful tech empires on the East Coast. The man in the tailored suit, the one who moved through boardrooms like they were built for him. But once, he was just a man who laughed over greasy pizza on a street corner, with a woman who challenged every rule he'd built his life around. Aveline Monroe wasn't part of his world. She didn't try to be. She was the kind of woman who remembered strangers' birthdays, who bought her clothes secondhand but gave her heart freely. A school teacher with ink on her fingers and warmth in her voice. She once said to him, "Stories are how we teach people to care, and if we can teach them to care, we can teach them to change." He didn't understand it then. Not really. But time has a way of making you remember the things you wish you hadn't forgotten. The truth, he had loved her. But love, when left alone, doesn't survive. It starves. It gets quiet, and then it disappears under the weight of ego and fear. He let the pressure of legacy and power crush everything soft in him. And on a Tuesday morning, when she was 5 months pregnant, he left without a goodbye. Only signed papers and silence. The world applauded him for his billion-dollar deals, but they never saw the woman staring out a hospital window, holding the child he didn't meet, until 5 years later. Now they were in the same room again. But they weren't the same people anymore. She hadn't spoken his name in years, not in anger, not in sorrow. She'd simply folded it away like a letter you stop rereading when it no longer hurts. But fate, timing, or perhaps something deeper, had other plans, because now here he was, sitting cross-legged on the floor of a literacy center named after a child he'd never held, listening to that same child sound out new words with the wide-eyed joy only 5-year-olds carry. Her name was Maris. Aveline had chosen it carefully. It meant of the sea, because when her world had cracked, she needed to believe in something steady, something that moved forward no matter how fierce the storm. Everything in that room had been built from grit. From bake sales, late-night lesson plans, grant applications written between diaper changes. It wasn't built to prove anything to anyone. It was built so no other child would feel small, and no other mother would feel powerless. She didn't expect to see him again. Not here. Not like this. But the years had changed him. She could see it in his shoulders, no longer squared like armor, but lowered, loosened. The sharpness in his expression was still there, but so was something quieter. Regret, maybe, or hunger for something he couldn't name. As he rose from the floor and turned toward her, their eyes met. The air didn't shift. No music swelled. No one clapped. But something passed between them. Something old, unfinished. And possible, not forgiveness. Not yet, but maybe the start of it. This is the story of the man who walked away, and the woman who chose to rise instead of break, and what happened when life forced them to stand across from each other, once more, with everything to lose and something new to protect. Kellen Hawthorne didn't believe in softness. In his world, power had a posture, chin high, jaw firm, eyes unreadable. He had mastered it all by the time he turned 30, a corner office, with a view that could swallow the skyline, private boardrooms, where older men listened when he spoke, and a last name that carried weight in places he had never even visited. He wore silence like a shield and purpose like a uniform. There were no stutters in his speech, no hesitations in his schedule, no cracks in the armor. He was the CEO of Hawthorne Dynamics, the face of innovation, efficiency, and discipline. But there were days, quiet ones, when he couldn't remember the last time he laughed without calculating its effect, or the last time someone called him by his first name without attaching a title to it. Legacy wasn't a choice. It was a demand. His father, cold, meticulous, and impossible to please, had built the foundation. Kellen was expected to elevate it, expand it, perfect it. Feelings didn't belong in quarterly reports. Emotion was a liability. And love? Love was never on the schedule. Until the night he met her. Aveline Monroe didn't enter rooms. She arrived like a season. Not loud, not boastful, just quietly unforgettable. She taught 3rd grade at a public school in Brooklyn. Her hands often had smudges of ink from handwritten lesson plans. Her bookshelf sagged under the weight of old novels, not for show but for comfort. Her favorite days were ones where the sun came through her apartment window, just right, and she could sip tea with a new book and no rush to be anywhere. To the world she was ordinary, but there was something in the way she listened, fully, like nothing you said was ever wasted. She had learned to find beauty in small things. A child's lopsided drawing, a sunflower growing where it shouldn't, a handwritten note left on a desk. People often mistook her softness for weakness. But her strength was not loud. It was rooted. They met by what most would call coincidence. Kellen had been forced, by PR advisors more than interest, to attend a community fundraising event. He was meant to give a short speech, pose for a few photos, and leave. But something unexpected happened. As he reached for a drink, someone bumped into him, lightly, playfully. "You're blocking the silent auction table," a voice said, warm and lightly teasing. He turned. She was holding a clipboard and a plate of cookies. The soft flush in her cheeks, the worn denim jacket, the mismatched earrings. Everything about her was unpolished, real. He couldn't explain it, but he didn't walk away. They ended up sitting on folding chairs in the corner, sharing stories about childhood books and the weird cafeteria food in public schools. She spoke with her hands. He watched them more than he listened. They left the event together. No agenda, no pretense. That night, they sat on a curb sharing a greasy slice of pizza, their laughter echoing off buildings taller than dreams. For the first time in a long time, Kellen didn't feel like someone's heir or headline. He just felt human. Their love didn't unfold with logic. It bloomed. Quietly. Completely. He brought her coffee during her lunch breaks. She read to him from her favorite poems. He canceled meetings just to sit beside her in silence. She asked him questions no one dared to, and he didn't hate her for it. The media went wild when they went public. The billionaire and the schoolteacher. But Aveline never cared for the headlines. She still bought groceries in the same neighborhood store. Still hugged her students like they were her own. They married in a small garden with mismatched chairs and handwritten vows. Kellen had never looked more unguarded. For a while, they made their own kind of peace. Their first year of marriage was something close to magic. Late-night pancakes in the kitchen, unplanned weekend getaways, slow dances in the living room with no music at all. Kellen still carried the weight of his empire, but somehow Aveline softened the load. Her presence reminded him that life wasn't measured only in market shares or milestones. It could be counted in quiet mornings and handwritten notes tucked into briefcases. For the first time, he had something that felt like balance, but even balance can be temporary. In their second year, the shift began, not with an explosion, but with small silences. Kellen's company launched a massive new venture. It was his most ambitious project yet, and every investor, every board member, every business magazine was watching. He stopped coming home before midnight. Aveline didn't complain. Not at first. She knew the man she married carried the weight of many expectations. But the space between them began to stretch, slowly, painfully, until it became the third occupant in their home. Then came the moment that changed everything. She stood in the doorway of his office one morning, clutching a small white stick with trembling fingers and a shy, glowing smile. "We're going to have a baby." The words hung there, soft, but heavy. He looked up, startled. A pause, just long enough to bruise. "Oh," he said. Not joy, not anger, just distance. She tried to cover it with a laugh. "I know it's sudden, but I'm happy. I really am." He nodded, kissed her forehead, and went back to answering emails. The following weeks were a blur. Aveline decorated a nursery that he rarely walked into. She picked names from books they'd once read together. She filled the silence with hope, willing it to be enough. But something was slipping in him. He attended meetings with a haunted focus. At night, he lay beside her, but didn't hold her. His father's voice echoed in his head. "You're not built for this." Distractions make men weak. And deep down, a voice of his own whispered the one thing he never said aloud. What if I fail her? What if I fail them both? Aveline began to notice the quiet unraveling of his presence. He missed the first ultrasound. He forgot their anniversary. When she asked if he wanted to feel the baby kick, he smiled, but never reached out. She started talking more to herself than to him. One night, she made his favorite dinner and waited. The food went cold. His voicemail offered the same sterile excuse, late night. Sorry. She sat alone at the table, hand resting on her belly, whispering promises to the tiny life growing inside her. You're not alone, she said softly. I'll never let you feel what I'm feeling right now. Kellen wasn't cruel, but fear doesn't always come in loud footsteps. Sometimes it shows up in avoidance, in the way someone stops meeting your eyes, in the way doors close a little faster, and conversations don't last as long. He loved her, but love without effort is like a fire untended. It doesn't end with smoke, it ends in silence. The morning it happened was unremarkable in every other way. She woke to the sound of the front door clicking shut. Still groggy, she called out for him. No answer. In the kitchen, the coffee was made. His mug sat untouched. On the counter was a thick envelope. Divorce papers. Filed. Signed. Delivered. There was no note. Only her name at the top, and his name at the bottom. For a long time she couldn't move. The papers rested in her hands, trembling under their own cruel simplicity. Her signature was already printed beside a line she hadn't agreed to sign. It felt like reading the end of a story she didn't know had already finished. The clock ticked. The kettle hissed. Somewhere outside, life went on. Inside, hers stood still. She sat on the kitchen floor, the envelope open beside her, tears streaming without sound. The silence was a living thing, pressing down until she couldn't tell if she was breathing or breaking. Her mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe he was overwhelmed, maybe it was temporary. But her heart knew better. This wasn't hesitation, this was an exit. The man who once whispered promises against her skin had chosen a signature over a conversation. Aveline cried until her body had no tears left. When she finally stood, her reflection in the hallway mirror startled her. Eyes red, lips trembling, shoulders shaking. She barely recognized herself. She whispered, "It's just us now," one hand on her stomach. Her baby kicked for the first time. And that was when she decided to keep going, not for him, not for the love that had withered, but for the life still blooming inside her. The days that followed were a blur of motions performed on autopilot. She returned to work. She smiled for her students. She pretended to be fine when friends asked where Kellen was. The rumors started quietly and spread like whispers in a hallway. He left her, no explanation, typical billionaire story. Aveline didn't correct them. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Pain had a way of silencing even the strongest voices. Every night she sat by the nursery window, staring out at the city lights. The mobile above the crib turned slowly, casting soft shapes on the wall, circles, of light that faded and returned again, like hope learning how to breathe. Kellen's absence became its own presence. She could still feel him in small things. The coffee mug he never used, the scent of his cologne in the closet, the faint indentation on his side of the bed. She wanted to hate him. Sometimes she did. Other times she only missed the version of him who laughed over pizza, the man who once said her kindness made the world softer. One evening, as she graded homework, her phone buzzed. An automated email from his company, statement regarding CEO's personal matters. It read like a business memo. Cold, polished, detached. Aveline closed her laptop. She didn't cry this time. She only whispered to her unborn child, "We'll be fine. You'll have love, even if it's just from me." The months that followed hardened her resolve. She worked until her back ached, attended doctor appointments alone, and filled the nursery with thrifted treasures and second-hand books. Each small act became a quiet rebellion against the emptiness he left behind. When her daughter finally arrived, Eveline named her Maris, a word she'd once underlined in a book of poetry. It meant of the sea, endless, constant, free. Holding her for the first time, Eveline whispered, "You are my beginning, not my reminder." In that instant she made a promise, not to rebuild what was lost, but to build something new entirely, something that would never leave. That night, the city hummed beyond her apartment windows, indifferent to her heartbreak and her newborn's quiet breathing. Eveline stood by the glass, her reflection faint in the dim light. Her hand rested on her belly, the place where love had both ended and begun again. No tears, no pleading, just stillness. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, she was learning how to start again. If this moment broke something in you, think about how you'd rebuild from it. What would you have done in Eveline's shoes? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The delivery room was quiet. No excited whispers, no hand to hold, no cameras flashing with joy. Only the sound of her daughter's first breath and a nurse's soft voice saying, "She's healthy, she's strong." Eveline reached out, trembling, as the nurse placed the newborn on her chest. The baby's skin was warm, her eyes squinting against the unfamiliar world. Eveline kissed her forehead, tears sliding down her face, this time not from sadness, but from a love so fierce it almost hurt. She whispered, "Maris," the name she had carried in her heart long before she carried it in her arms. Of the sea, because the ocean keeps moving, no matter what it loses. Because waves return, even after breaking. Because her daughter deserved a name that promised strength without having to shout. The first weeks were brutal. Maris cried through the night, her tiny body unfamiliar with sleep. Eveline, still healing from birth, rocked her in the dark with lullabies she barely remembered learning. She went days without more than 2 hours of rest. Her body ached. Her spirit wavered. But every morning she got up, not because she had energy, she didn't, but because she had someone to show up for. She returned to teaching part-time when Maris was just 3 months old. Bills piled quickly, and maternity leave didn't stretch as far as people liked to pretend it did. She found a neighbor to babysit during school hours, paid in cash and baked goods. At night, when Maris finally slept, Eveline took freelance tutoring jobs online. And when the house fell silent, she opened her laptop and studied nonprofit management with eyes that burned from exhaustion. Every minute of every day was claimed. She pumped breast milk between classes, answered emails while bouncing Maris in a sling, graded essays with one hand and held her baby with the other. Once, during a break at school, she found herself crying alone in the supply closet, muffling the sobs into her scarf so no one would hear. But there were small wins, too. The first time, Maris smiled. The night Eveline passed a difficult exam. The morning a student gave her a drawing that said, "You make me feel safe." These moments didn't pay the bills, but they fed her soul. And that was enough, for now. Late one night, she watched Maris sleep, a stack of opened bills beside her and a blank page on her screen. Eveline stared at it, unsure of what to write. But the thought kept returning. Children shouldn't have to fight this hard to feel seen. She remembered her classroom, half her students coming to school hungry. Some wore shoes that barely fit. Others never brought lunch. Their eyes held stories too big for their age. She looked at her daughter and whispered, "You're not the only one I want to protect." That night, the seed of something began to form. It wasn't a master plan. There was no funding, no wealthy donor, just an idea, and a mother who had nothing left to lose but her time and her voice. The first version of the Maris Foundation lived in a spiral notebook tucked beside bottles and burp cloths. It wasn't a brand. It wasn't a business. It was a list of kids who needed backpacks, of classrooms with broken heaters, of neighborhoods with no libraries. Eveline scribbled during feedings, during subway rides, during her 15-minute lunch breaks. She wasn't building an empire. She was trying to fill the holes no one else seemed to see. At first, it was simple. Collect used books, organize after-school tutoring, start a weekend reading club in the community center basement. No press, no grants, just grassroots. She made posters with her students during art time and hung them on fences and deli windows. She baked cookies to sell at school fairs. She knocked on church doors and asked for borrowed space. Half the people ignored her. The other half weren't sure what she was trying to do. But a few, just a few, showed up. And that was enough to begin. She held the first reading event in a borrowed room that smelled like dust and old carpet. 10 folding chairs, 1 box of donated books, 7 kids. She brought Maris with her, swaddled and sleeping. She stood in front of those children and read aloud with everything she had, voice rising, eyes bright, every page turned with purpose. One of the girls asked if she could take a book home. Eveline said yes, and slipped 2 more into her bag. That night she cried, but not from exhaustion. This time, it was hope. But not every day felt like victory. Some weeks she couldn't raise enough money to buy juice boxes for the reading group. Some nights she debated giving up, just for a break, just for one moment of stillness. Grants went unanswered. Applications got denied. Local businesses shrugged. She taught full-time, parented full-time, studied part-time, built a foundation in the cracks, but her will didn't wear down. It sharpened, because every time a child said, "This is the first book I've ever owned," she knew quitting wasn't an option. Eventually, a small article was published about her in the local newspaper. Brooklyn teacher fights for kids with books and cookies. It wasn't polished. The photo was grainy, but people read it. A retired librarian dropped off 5 boxes of novels. A grocery store manager offered a monthly donation. An old friend built her a website for free. Little by little, the foundation grew, not because it was trendy, but because it was true. What Eveline lacked in resources, she made up for in trust. Parents let their kids stay late at her programs because they knew she'd never leave them behind. Volunteers returned because she remembered their birthdays. Donors came back because she wrote handwritten thank you notes every single time. She didn't try to impress people. She tried to show up, and it worked. 3 years after that dusty basement reading circle, the Maris Foundation signed a partnership with the city to place mobile libraries in underserved neighborhoods. It didn't happen overnight. Before city officials returned her calls, Eveline had already rebuilt classrooms, with secondhand shelves and volunteers from her weekend reading sessions. Before donors came knocking, she had walked neighborhoods passing out flyers and books like candy, dragging a stroller behind her. But eventually, the momentum was undeniable. Maris, now a spirited toddler with wild curls and 1,000 questions, had grown up on the floors of these reading centers. She'd nap under desks while her mother met with potential sponsors. She'd color beside charts of fundraising goals and nap beside towers of donated books. Eveline never hid the struggle from her, because she believed children don't need to see perfection to feel safe. They need to see effort, honesty, and love, especially when things are hard. The foundation expanded, slowly, steadily, from Brooklyn to neighboring boroughs. Local news became regional coverage. Then one day, a national morning show producer saw a viral clip of a boy reading his first full sentence at one of Eveline's learning pods. They reached out. She didn't have a media team. She didn't wear designer clothes or prepare talking points. She just showed up, her voice calm, her story raw and unrehearsed. She talked about literacy gaps, children who sleep hungry, schools without books, and the power of one adult choosing not to walk away. She didn't try to be perfect. She was present, and it struck something deep in viewers across the country. Donations flooded in, not from corporations, but from teachers, parents, veterans, retired janitors, and teenagers who had once been those very kids sitting on carpet floors listening to someone believe in them. Suddenly, the Maris Foundation was on maps. Centers opened in 3 new states. Local businesses began sponsoring reading corners in their stores. One woman started a books and breakfast club in her laundromat because of a clip she saw of Eveline online. The mission wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and Eveline never lost sight of that. She still walked Maris to preschool every morning, still answered emails past midnight, her daughter curled up at her side, still called the mothers of every child in her programs to check in, even when her own voice was hoarse with fatigue. The success wasn't measured in numbers. It was in names. Names of children who went from failing to flourishing. Names of parents who said, "This is the first time someone's cared." Names of volunteers who stayed because they felt seen. Her past didn't vanish. There were still moments it caught her off guard. An old headline, a familiar name in a news ticker. Kellen's company grew, appeared in articles, got awards. She saw him on screens sometimes, looking exactly the same, and completely different, but he no longer occupied the center of her story. Maris did. The children did. The work did. One evening, while organizing books for a new center, Maris crawled into her lap with a crayon drawing. It was a stick figure family. One woman, one girl, and a building with hearts in the windows. Aveline smiled. "What's this?" "It's us," Maris said proudly. "And that's where we help people feel brave." Aveline held her close. That's what they'd built, out of loss, grit, and something deeper than pride. Not just a nonprofit, a place where people remembered they mattered. San Francisco glistened that morning. The skyline shimmered behind glass towers, banners hung from streetlights, and sleek cars lined the curb outside the conference center. Inside, the air buzzed with the polished energy of high society, executives, philanthropists, investors, academics, and cameras clicking in sequence. The annual Tech and Social Impact Summit was one of the year's most coveted stages. Invitations were limited, spotlights unforgiving, and Kellen Hawthorne had just been introduced as the morning's keynote speaker. He walked onto the stage as he always did, unflinching, precise, composed. Applause followed him. Phones recorded him. The moderator called him a visionary. But if you looked closely, just beneath the charm and certainty, there was something tired in the corners of his eyes. He adjusted his mic. "Good morning," he began, his voice firm. "Innovation without empathy is a machine without direction. We build futures, yes, but who are we building them for?" The audience leaned in. It was a good speech. Sharp, researched, cleanly delivered. But the truth was, Kellen hadn't felt connected to his own words in a long time. He knew how to perform, how to say the right things, sell the right dreams. But lately he'd begun to feel like a guest inside his own life. He had the influence, the portfolio, the public praise, but not the peace. As he finished, the applause returned, predictable and strong. He smiled, nodded, stepped down, and made his way to the green room where other speakers prepared. An assistant handed him a bottle of water and congratulated him. He barely heard her. He felt distracted, uneasy, and then a voice crackled over the speaker. "Our next guest has changed thousands of young lives across the country, bringing books, care, and confidence to children, often overlooked by society." Kellen froze. Founder of the Maris Foundation, an advocate for educational equity, and a voice for rebuilding from hardship. Please welcome Aveline Monroe. He hadn't heard her name spoken in public in years. His heart didn't race, but it tightened. He turned toward the monitor in the hallway. The stage lights dimmed. Applause filled the space again, but this time it was different, warmer, rooted. And then she walked out. Aveline. She wore a cream-colored blouse, her hair gently pinned back, a simple pendant resting at her collar. No flash, no scripted flair, only calm, centered presence. She stood behind the podium for a moment, letting the room settle. Then she spoke. Aveline gripped the edges of the podium lightly. She didn't need to clear her throat or scan her notes. The silence that met her felt different, not the kind that waits for performance, but the kind that listens because it already trusts the speaker. She smiled softly. "When I was 28, I learned that heartbreak can be a teacher," she began. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. "I was a public school teacher then. I believed in small miracles, that one story, one kind word, could shift the course of a child's day. But life reminded me that even the strongest hearts can be broken. And when mine was, I found myself holding a baby in one arm and a stack of unpaid bills in the other." She paused. No dramatics, no tears, just truth spoken clean. "I thought my life was ending," she continued, "but it was only changing shape. Sometimes pain clears away the noise so we can hear our real purpose. For me, that purpose became every child who feels unseen, every child who believes their circumstances define their worth." A hush settled. People leaned forward, some clutching notepads, others simply frozen. She went on. "I started with 7 children and 1 box of books, that was all. But when love is honest, it multiplies. The Maris Foundation wasn't born from privilege. It was born from a promise I made in a 1-bedroom apartment while a baby slept beside me." She smiled, eyes glistening, not with sorrow but with light. That promise was simple: no child should feel forgotten. Backstage, Kellen stood motionless. He could hear every word through the speakers. Each sentence landed like a weight on his chest. Her voice, still warm, still steady, carried no bitterness, no blame, but it carried power, a kind he'd never possessed. He remembered that voice once whispering poetry beside him, laughter spilling between them like air. Now it filled a hall of hundreds, shaping minds, stirring hearts. And every syllable was a mirror, a reflection of what he'd chosen to abandon. Aveline continued, "When people ask what success looks like, I think of small hands holding big dreams. I think of a boy who told me he wants to build houses for families who have none. I think of a girl who wrote in her journal, 'I want to be kind, like Miss Aveline.'" A soft chuckle moved through the audience. "I think of my daughter, who once asked me what courage means. I told her courage isn't loud. It's doing the right thing when no one claps for you." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was deep, respectful, moved. She finished simply, "So here's my message. When life breaks you, don't rush to patch the pieces. Let the cracks breathe. Because sometimes what grows through them is stronger than what stood before." She stepped back from the podium, gave a small nod, and walked off stage. Kellen didn't move. For a moment, the room around him blurred. The conversation of passing assistants faded into nothing. He could only hear her last line, echoing in his mind. Let the cracks breathe. He realized he hadn't truly breathed in years. The hallway behind the stage was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of staff and murmured instructions over walkie-talkies. Aveline walked slowly, her posture composed, her thoughts still echoing with the faces in the crowd, eyes that had held sorrow, recognition, hope. She didn't notice the man waiting near the far wall at first, but Kellen saw her immediately. He didn't speak right away. There were 1,000 words to say and none that could carry the weight of 5 years of silence. She glanced up and paused. Their eyes met. It was brief but undeniable. He took a step closer. Aveline. Her name in his voice. The first time in years. She didn't flinch, didn't recoil, but her posture shifted, not in fear, not in anger, in control. "Hello, Kellen," she said, her voice steady. He searched her expression for something familiar. Her eyes were the same, but different, deeper, sharper, untouchable in a way they never were before. "I saw your talk," he said. She nodded once, calm. "I saw yours too." He offered a strange smile. "You were remarkable." She looked at him carefully. "Thank you." He hesitated, running a hand down his sleeve, a gesture she remembered from years ago whenever he was unsure. "I've wanted to say something for a long time." She raised a brow. "Now's your chance." He swallowed. "I was afraid. I convinced myself that walking away was the least harmful option. But it was weak and cruel. And I'm sorry." The words didn't tumble. They landed, heavy, truthful. Aveline held his gaze. There was no flicker of satisfaction, no vindication, just silence. Finally, she spoke. "Fear is real, but so is choice. We don't always get to control how life tests us, but we do get to choose how we respond." He nodded slowly, eyes lowered. She added gently, "Some of us choose to change." The pause that followed was neither cold nor forgiving. It was simply final. Kellen opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew better than to chase closure. She didn't owe him that. He stepped back, gave a quiet nod, and let her pass. "Would you forgive someone who walked away at your darkest hour? Drop a yes or never in the comments. This one deserves a conversation." They didn't plan to cross paths again. But shared circles have their own gravity. In the months following the summit, the Maris Foundation began piloting a tech integration program. Educational tablets designed to help children with limited access to books. One of the top silent contributors to the grant? Hawthorne Dynamics. At first it was handled through intermediaries, contracts, board approvals, logistical liaisons. But the deeper the project ran, the more their worlds began brushing shoulders. They attended the same panels, sat at the same fundraising roundtables, occasionally shared space at ribbon cuttings and press events. The encounters were brief, polite, mostly silent, but every time they stood in the same room something shifted, not tension exactly, just awareness. It was at a small learning center launch in Queens where it happened. Aveline stood near the check-in desk, clipboard in hand, scanning the room for missing volunteers. Maris was seated at a table nearby, drawing with markers, her brow furrowed in thought. Kellen arrived late. No entourage, No announcement, just a nod to the front desk and a subtle presence at the edge of the room. He didn't approach Evelyn immediately. He watched children pick up their first books, watched parents exchange tired smiles, watched a girl with a backpack 2 sizes too big ask if she could take one of the library books home forever. Then he saw her. Not Evelyn. Maris. She had her mother's eyes. Same intensity, same softness underneath. He hesitated. Every part of him wanted to run, not because he didn't want to meet her, but because he wasn't sure he deserved to. But she turned suddenly, her gaze catching his. "Hi," she said. Just that. Nothing more. He crouched to her level, voice careful. "Hi." She looked at him curiously, then at the name tag clipped to his chest. "You helped the center get tablets." He nodded. "I did. Mom says that's kind." He paused. "Your mom is kind." Maris looked at him, puzzled. "Do I know you?" Before he could respond, Evelyn was beside her, kneeling quietly. "Maris, this is Mr. Kellen. He's a friend of the foundation." Maris nodded politely, already distracted by her drawing. She turned back to her table. Kellen stood slowly. Evelyn didn't speak right away. She looked at him, really looked. He was dressed simply. No blazer, no pretense. His face was tired, but open. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know," he replied. "I wanted to." She studied him. "What do you want from all this?" He glanced toward the table where Maris sat humming to herself. Nothing, except to keep showing up. That day marked a beginning, not of forgiveness, not of reconciliation, just a shift. Evelyn didn't invite him in, but she didn't shut the door either. And sometimes that's enough to start something new. They didn't make a plan. At first, it was just logistics. Evelyn texted him once, brief, factual. "Maris has her school showcase next Thursday. You're welcome to come." He arrived 10 minutes early, sat in the back row, didn't bring flowers, didn't bring attention, but he stood when the class finished, clapping like it mattered more than any boardroom win he'd ever known. Maris ran to her mother first. Then, without prompting, she turned to him. "Did you see me?" "I did," he said, kneeling again. "You were amazing." She beamed. From then on, their overlap grew more frequent. Sometimes he picked Maris up from her after-school reading group when Evelyn got stuck in traffic. Sometimes he showed up to volunteer without asking, restocking bookshelves, assembling chairs, helping toddlers balance paintbrushes. Evelyn watched him, unsure what to make of the man who once vanished and now lingered so gently at the edges of their lives. There was no grand explanation, no drawn-out speeches, just a consistent presence. He never asked to be called Dad. He never tried to reclaim anything. He just kept showing up. They began to talk more, small conversations over coffee and paper cups, exchanged after events. "How's work?" she asked once. He shrugged. "Same as always, but it feels smaller now." She tilted her head. "That's not how most people describe billion-dollar companies." He smiled faintly. "Most people haven't stood in a room full of 7-year-olds who believe in magic because you gave them a book." Her eyes lingered on him a second longer than she meant to. Then she looked away. One afternoon, after a planning meeting for a joint program, the conversation shifted. They stood outside the community center. Maris was inside playing with building blocks. Evelyn folded her arms, not from cold, but habit. "You're not the man who left." "I'll admit that I'm not," Kellen said quietly. "But I don't understand why now, after everything, after silence. Why now?" He exhaled slowly. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I didn't know how to love without hurting people." She blinked. That wasn't the answer she expected. He went on. "Growing up, love always came with rules, with conditions. My father taught me that success meant control, that vulnerability was a liability. I thought being a good partner, a good parent, meant knowing exactly what to do, and I didn't. I panicked." Her voice was calm. "So you disappeared." "I did." He looked away. "And I regret it every day." Silence stretched between them. She didn't rush to fill it. Evelyn finally said, "You're asking for something without asking, aren't you?" "No," he replied. "I'm not asking for anything. Not trust, not closeness, not a second chance." He turned to face her fully. "I just want to become someone worthy of being in Maris's world. Even if that's all I ever get. She nodded once, slow, then, that's the first honest thing I've heard you say in years. He didn't smile. But something behind his eyes loosened, as if the weight he'd carried for so long had shifted, even just slightly. Fall crept into the city with crisp air and yellow leaves. At the Marist Foundation's weekend program, parents sipped coffee and folding chairs while their kids painted, read, or built towers with plastic blocks. The space buzzed with small laughter and bigger hopes. Kellen sat cross-legged beside Maris, helping her glue stars onto a paper cutout of the solar system. She leaned her elbow into him like it was natural, as if he'd always been there. Evelyn watched from across the room, one hand resting on a stack of books. Not staring, just noticing. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress. He was simply present. Later that afternoon, Evelyn caught up with one of the center coordinators. I thought he was just another suit when I first saw him, the woman admitted. But he's been here every Saturday for a month. No cameras, no announcements, just shows up with snacks and a screwdriver. Evelyn smiled faintly. He used to send flowers when he felt guilty. Now he shows up with juice boxes. Honestly, the coordinator said, that's the better gift. That night, Maris climbed into her mother's lap with her usual bedtime request. Tell me something true. It was a phrase they'd invented together, their version of a lullaby. Evelyn brushed her daughter's curls back and whispered, you are made of kindness and courage, and the world is better because you're in it. Maris yawned. What's something true about him? She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. Evelyn paused. He's learning. And he loves you. Okay, Maris mumbled, eyes fluttering closed. The following week, after another successful program event, Kellen and Evelyn walked side by side to their cars. The sky was soft with evening. Street lights flickered on one by one. Kellen broke the quiet. Thank you for letting me be part of her life. I know you didn't have to. Evelyn stopped walking. It wasn't about what I owed you. It was about what she deserved. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. She deserves truth, she continued. Stability, a chance to know you, the version of you that's showing up now, not the one who left. I'm trying, he said. I know, she replied, and I see it. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she asked, do you still feel afraid? Kellen exhaled, deeply. Yes, but not of being a father. Not anymore. Then what? He looked at her, honesty etched in his voice. Of wasting the time I have left, of knowing what matters, and still not doing enough. She didn't reply right away, just held his gaze, then, gently. Then don't waste it. That fall became a season of small changes. Not grand declarations, not sweeping gestures, just meals shared between meetings, drop-offs and pickups, notes in Maris's lunchbox from both of them. The kind of healing that doesn't ask to be seen, only felt. There was no announcement, no formal shift, just time. And what Kellen chose to do with it. He didn't ask for more space in Maris's life. He simply accepted the space she gave him. He picked her up from school twice a week. Some days they walked to the park. Other days, they sat in silence, eating apples and watching squirrels chase each other across benches. It wasn't always easy. There were questions, hesitations, awkward silences, but she never looked at him with fear. Just curiosity. He learned how to answer those questions gently, with presence instead of promises, with time instead of excuses. At the foundation, he kept showing up, not just for press-worthy events, but for the unglamorous tasks no one wanted. Restocking shelves, assembling storage units, sweeping floors after story hour. He was there early, stayed late. He didn't lead with authority. He asked questions. He learned names. Volunteers began greeting him with familiarity, not deference. Parents nodded when they saw him helping clean up. He became part of the background, in the best way. One Tuesday, Evelyn stood by the hallway window as Kellen walked Maris to her classroom. She watched him kneel as her daughter handed him a drawing, stick figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. He didn't know Evelyn was watching, but she saw everything, the way he placed the drawing in his pocket instead of folding it, the way he waited until she disappeared into the classroom before exhaling, the way his shoulders had softened, not in defeat, but in humility. When he turned and noticed her standing there, he didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just nodded. She nodded back. That was how they spoke now, with gestures, timing, small choices. They shared a quiet dinner a few nights later. Aveline had stayed late at the center. Maris was asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket with a book still open beside her. Kellen had brought takeout. They sat at the kitchen table, lights dimmed, voices low. She asked about a project he was working on. Nothing extraordinary, just curiosity. He asked about her upcoming reading event. She explained with excitement, hands moving in that way she hadn't realized he still remembered. For a moment, it felt almost familiar. Not in a painful way, in a gentle one. They didn't talk about the past, not that night. They just shared a meal. And it was enough. The weather turned cool again. Maris had taken to wearing mismatched socks and asking endless questions about the moon. On a Saturday morning at the reading center, she sat curled between Kellen and Aveline, listening as a volunteer read aloud. Her head rested lightly on her mother's shoulder, one hand gripping her father's sleeve. Neither adult pulled away. When the story ended, Maris turned to them, her voice small but certain. "I love my family." The sentence was soft, unrehearsed, utterly true. Kellen blinked. Aveline didn't speak right away. Maris didn't wait for a response. She reached into her bag, pulled out a crayon drawing, and placed it gently in Aveline's lap. "You can keep it," she said. "I made us together." Aveline looked down. 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one small, standing under a sky of stars. No names, no labels, just closeness. She folded the paper carefully, holding back the swell in her throat. "Thank you, baby," she whispered. Kellen didn't move. His hands stayed on his knees, but his eyes shimmered with something held too long. He'd said so much over the past few months without saying anything at all. But this moment, these 5 words from a child, said more than either of them ever could. Later that evening, Aveline stood in her kitchen, the drawing resting on the fridge behind her. Kellen leaned against the counter, sipping tea she'd offered without ceremony. "You've been consistent," she said quietly. He nodded, unsure where it was going. "That matters more than I thought it would." He looked at her. "I never expected to be forgiven. I just didn't want to keep disappearing." "You haven't." She turned to face him fully. "But consistency doesn't fix everything." "I know." A pause. Then, still, "It's changing something." That admission didn't come lightly. Kellen didn't press it. He only said, "She made me want to be better, but you made me believe I could be." Aveline exhaled slowly, eyes on the floor. "I used to hate you, you know. I figured. Then I didn't." Another pause. "Then I didn't know what I felt at all." Silence hung between them, not heavy, not sharp, just real. In the days that followed, their time became less choreographed. No longer bound by shared duties, they started spending time simply because they wanted to. Kellen began showing up for drop-offs even on days he wasn't scheduled. They grabbed coffee after Maris's school events, walked the long way around the block just to finish a conversation. Once he surprised Aveline with a single paperback, a book they'd laughed over years ago. She didn't react dramatically, just smiled. But that smile lingered longer than it used to. The garden was strung with warm lights, swaying gently above tables covered in books, fresh fruit, and hand-painted signs made by local students. It was the Maris Foundation's 5th-year celebration, not a gala, not a press conference, just a gathering of people who believed in what they'd built. Aveline wore a simple blue dress. Maris clung to her side for the first hour, proudly giving guests a tour of the book display and pointing out her drawing on the community board. Kellen helped wherever needed, arranging chairs, directing parking, setting up the food table. He never hovered, never made himself the center. But everyone noticed. More importantly, she noticed. After the speeches ended and the music softened, Aveline stood near the edge of the garden, watching Maris chase bubbles with 2 other kids near the fountain. Kellen approached slowly, hands tucked in his pockets. "She's gotten fast." "She never used to run," Aveline said. "Not like that. Not toward people. Maybe she feels safe now." Aveline looked at him. "She does." He nodded. "I'm grateful for that. Grateful you gave her that kind of love." She glanced toward the string lights above. "I gave her what I had. That wasn't always enough." Kellen's voice was quiet. It was everything. They stood in silence. People milled behind them, but it felt like the world had gone still. Then Kellen turned to her, careful. "I've been thinking about something." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a warning." He smiled faintly. It's not a question. It's a promise, one I'm willing to make whether you accept it or not. He reached into his coat, not for a box, not for a ring, but for a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. She opened it. A handwritten letter. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't perfect. It listed things, small, deliberate things. And I'll show up. I'll listen, not defend. I'll parent with you, not around you. I'll take the hard days without retreating. And I'll keep loving Maris with actions, not speeches. I'll love you without assumption. And I'll earn it every day. When she finished reading, he said quietly, I don't deserve a second chance. But if you're willing to build something with me, even slowly, I'll never waste it. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with clarity. I'm not the same person you married. I know, he said. That's why I'm here. She looked down at the letter once more, then back at him. Then let's write a new story, she said softly. Together, still watching? That means this story moved something in you. If it did, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let someone else feel what you just felt. Some stories don't begin with fireworks. Some begin with silence, with absence, with the kind of grief that teaches you how to rebuild your heart with your own hands. Aveline never asked for strength. She earned it through late nights, quiet tears, and promises whispered into the dark. She didn't become powerful because someone gave her a platform. She became powerful because she refused to stay small in the face of abandonment. And Kellen? He didn't return as a savior. He returned as a man who had to unlearn everything he once believed made him strong. Their story didn't end in the courtroom. It didn't end in the hospital. It began again, slowly, deliberately, in library corners, hallway handoffs, and sentences spoken not to impress, but to connect. At the center of it all was Maris, the girl with crayon drawings and endless questions, a child born in heartbreak who grew up in a home built on healing. She became more than a daughter. She became proof that something beautiful could grow from the wreckage. Let's remember what this story taught us. Feelings fade when not fed. Presence is how love stays alive. Showing up matters more than saying the right words. Being left isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of who you were always meant to become. 3. People can change, but not all deserve a way back. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Trust is earned through action, not regret. 4. Strength often looks quiet. It's not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it looks like doing what's right without needing applause. 5. Children learn by watching. Maris saw grace in her mother and growth in her father. She learned love by observing it, not being lectured on it. 6. Second chances aren't given, they're earned. Kellen didn't reclaim a family. He built his place in it, one humble moment at a time. 7. Purpose grows from pain. Aveline's heartbreak didn't break her. It gave her direction, and her direction gave hope to thousands. Some love stories don't start perfect. They're torn, stitched, and scarred. But the best ones, they're the ones that survive. Not because they were easy, but because someone chose not to give up when it would have been easier to walk away. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Like, comment, and subscribe for more soul-stirring tales from Mr. Ross Story Trail. And remember, no matter how your story began, it's never too late to choose a better ending.